Trump administration.
In the nearly 6 months since the Trump administration has taken control of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Bureau's leadership has focused almost exclusively on rolling back any punishments, fines, and penalties doled out against companies during the Biden administration. Companies that were supposed to refund their customers or pay a penalty for unfair or deceptive practices are no longer bound to make their customers whole. Other companies facing charges of fraud or deceptive practices saw their lawsuits dropped. I'm Lisa Dwyer.
The neighborhood social site Nextdoor, hoping for a revival by turning to local news providers. As part of a redesign, Nextdoor is partnering with more than 3,500 local news outlets. More on these stories at townhall.com.
The following is an America Matters media production. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of the station or its advertisers, although we think they should. But that's the opinion of America Matters Media.
Come together right now over me.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Re-Federalist Radio, where we take a look at current events through an original intent of the Constitution lens. I am Brady, aka the War Hamster, and I'd like to welcome my co-host, good friend, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Good to be here. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming. Before we get going, I'd just like to thank all those listening on 93.7 KPGF AM, and AM 1060, and all of you listening on the affiliate networks, especially ZakiRadio.com. So the last couple weeks, we've been doing our annual event that we call a Supreme Court scorecard or scoreboard. And it's been interesting this year. Last year, I think, well, let's just go ahead and pull up the scoreboard and show the comparison, because the Supreme Court's getting much better grades from Doug and I this year than we have previously.
Yeah, we have a couple of justices that don't feel, I think, pressured by the current administration.
All right, let's pull that up on screen. We'll show that. For those of you who are on radio, just a spreadsheet giving letter grades for all the different cases. If we look at 2024, we got some Fs, a lot of Cs and Bs. There's some Ds. Murphy versus Missouri. We're going to revisit that today. And following the original intent of the founders. And more importantly, is it any of the Supreme Court's business in the first place to even be ruling on this? Quite often you'll see they'll make a good decision in something that's none of their business. All right, so with no further ado, you want to jump in?
Let's do it.
All right. First case we're doing today is called Childhood Health Defense versus Meta. That, of course, is the parent company of Facebook. And this was kind of an important case. It's about public and private censorship. So on Monday, June 30th, the Supreme Court turned down a petition from Children's Health Defense, leaving unexamined the group's challenge to what it describes as collusion between Meta, Facebook, and federal agencies aimed at suppressing constitutionally protected speech. Doug, you're familiar with this one, of course.
Very.
It's really interesting. It starts in 2020, and Children's Health Defense was putting out information that they thought was well-researched on things like vaccines and COVID-19. Those of us who lived through 2020 and COVID know exactly what happened next. They were targeted and silenced for their views, and they're claiming that it was under government influence. Now, we've been through, since this was filed, we've gone through the Twitter files, which actually exposed a lot of that government influence and coercion. We've also been through the lawsuit, which is now known as Murtha versus Missouri, originally Missouri v. Biden. And an awful lot was exposed there of basically how the censorship went down. And from a high level, really what happened is you'd be from the Department of State and, the government, USAID is giving a lot of contracts to, whether it be Facebook or Twitter, what have you, back in the day. And they say, look, we don't want this content out there. And they're not saying, okay, we're going to pull the money, but it's with a nod, wink, wink. And some of the emails that were exposed, it's a lot more than a nod, wink, wink. It's a government official saying, get this person off the internet, which, of course, is a massive First Amendment violation. Doug, can the government curtail your speech?
Well, no, but let's go a little deeper here real quick. So if Facebook had been operating independently, had made this decision as a business without any government influence, I would say that's their business. They can do that. No shoes, no shirt, no service, whatever. Businesses, even a public platform, can run their business as they want. That's not the problem here. The problem is not the censorship. The problem is the censorship is as a result of collusion with government. The federal government has no authority to be involved with this business, to not only when it comes to the censorship, but even colluding with private business the way it is. This is a mercantilism on steroids, and that's the problem. The First Amendment, of course, it says that Congress shall make no law regarding your speech, and there's no authority within the first 7 articles or any amendment that gives the federal government the power to collude or work with businesses or give money to businesses or dictate to businesses in the way that they were. I'm not talking basic regulations, obviously. We're going way beyond that. We're going through collusion. My biggest complaint has always been when it comes to government and the private sector. I don't care if the private sector does what it does for business. Let the consumers, let the market make the adjustments and regulate it. But when government gets involved, when there's collusion, that's where the Constitution is screaming. That's where the violations happen.
Yeah, and put it really simply, the government can't use a private company to do what the government itself cannot do. You cannot have a third party exercising illegal government authority. They basically can't be a hand's distance. And if they use coercion, there's a problem. So Children's Health Defense, the Ninth Circuit Court in 2024, Court of Appeals sided with Meta, and they held that the company's actions reflect private policy choices rather than government compulsion. Now, there's a lot of evidence that that's not the case, but that's what they held. Children's Health Defense hoped Supreme Court would take up the case, but they did not, and there's no public dissent for the reasoning for it. When we come back, we'll give it a grade and talk about how it relates to Missouri v. Biden. But until then, I think we're at a break.
Barbecue, the Butcher's Kitchen, would like to thank every customer for your loyalty and continued support through these challenging times. Call for takeout and delivery of rib tips, brisket, ahi, tuna, roasted veggies, and much more. Barbecue's open from 11 to 7, Monday through Saturday, and delivers hot food safe and healthy. Call 499-5855 for details. 499-5855 Barbecue, as featured on diners, drive-ins, and dives. Get real. Get into Barbecue Reno.
If you're living with diabetes and using insulin, you know the pain of pricking your fingers over and over again. Ouch! Well, by wearing a small remote device called a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, you can reduce the pain of pricking your fingers. If you administer insulin 3 or more times per day or use an insulin pump, call now and learn how a CGM can help you.
Painless. No more pricking my finger.
No finger pricks.
Convenience. They delivered it free and they took care of all the paperwork.
You can reduce pain right away. Plus, it's accurate, easy to use, and helps you spend more time in range. And if you have insurance, you can get a new CGM at little or no out-of-pocket cost. Call now and get free shipping of your new CGM. Plus, we'll bill your insurance for you. 800-432-8150. 800-432-8150. 800-432-8150. That's 800-432-8150.
Hey, this is Reba McEntire, and I wanted to talk to you about a serious problem right here in our own backyard. Did you know that there are nearly 16 million kids struggling with hunger in America? That's why the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks collects surplus food, engaging their communities in solving hunger and giving hope to hungry kids and their families. but they need your help. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.
To join the conversation, call 844-790-TALK. That's 844-790-8255. Now back to the show.
And we are back from the break. When we left you, we were talking about a Supreme Court case, Children's Health Defense versus Meta. They had appealed to the Supreme Court, and they were hoping that the Supreme Court would examine whether the distinction between public and private policies would be examined. And does this distinction really truly shield big tech from accountability when it suppresses speech at the behest of public officials? Supreme Court declined without any comment or explanation. No justices publicly dissented. They just said, no, we're not going to hear the case. It's very disappointing in many ways because First Amendment is one of our most sacred issues in this country. And if the government's going to use third parties to circumvent that, we've got issues. And they most certainly did do that. We've seen plenty of evidence. So, Doug, my first question for you, is this a case the Supreme Court should even be looking at?
Well, it is a case that they should be looking at. I think that they want to look at it, but I believe part of the reason they decided not to take the case was because they believe something bigger is coming down the line. They're waiting for more evidence, another case, or at least that's my thinking. And so I don't think this was a case of we don't think we have anything to do with this issue. I think it was a case of let's wait until there's more.
That case should have been Missouri versus Biden, which we'll touch on in a second here. Mm-hmm. So what kind of letter grade do you want to give this decision to punt?
Well, see, it depends. So I want you to do a grade/grade. On the surface, an F. They should have taken it. This is very important. First Amendment is sacred. However, I'm going to give them a secondary B because if I am right and they are saying, hey, let's punt it for now and waiting for more information. Another case can come down the line that's going to be even bigger. That if that's the case, then it may have been a smart move, but time will tell.
Well, what I say next may change your mind on that grade, so I give you the right to change your mind.
Okay.
I'm in with a solid D-. Mm-hmm. I just think it's awful. The reason I'm saying they already weighted him because Missouri versus Biden, also known as Murphy versus Missouri, is a case that they heard last year, and you and I both gave the Supreme Court a D for refusing that one. This is the big case filed by Missouri Attorney General, now U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt, and followed up with another really good Attorney General out of Missouri, Andrew Bailey, along with Louisiana and some private plaintiffs, including Jay Bhattacharya, who's now part of the HHS. They claim Biden violated the First Amendment by pressuring social media platforms to suppress conservative viewpoints on things like COVID, election integrity, the Hunter Biden laptop, etc. The documentation for that, and the judge there, a guy by the name of District Judge Terry Doty, ordered an awful lot of discovery in that case. They've got emails, they've got testimony. They were trying to get Dr. Fauci in there to testify, but he was able to wiggle out of it. The Supreme Court refused to hear this one. The Fifth Circuit affirmed part of the injunction. The original ruling that Doty gave was that the government's got to stop coercing. It prohibits the government from contacting social media and requesting content removal. That was the proper ruling by Doty. The Fifth Circuit affirmed part of that injunction, but narrowed its scope, and they found that the government actions constituted coercion in violation of the First Amendment, which means a Circuit Court of Appeals have already done the fact-finding, and Supreme Court refused to see it, and they reversed it 6-3, determining that plaintiffs lacked Article 3 standing to bring the suit. One of the worst decisions, I think, of last year. Amy Coney Barrett writes, the plaintiffs failed to demonstrate a direct link between specific government actions and their alleged injuries, as if censoring you off of YouTube while you make your living isn't enough.
Well, what they use on these cases, too, is something they call a political question. They try to be very careful not to pit, what they believe anyway, to pit different parts of government against each other, be it like Congress versus the courts or something like that. And so if they believe that there's a political question there, then they'll just strike it down lack of standing or political question. And like I said, it's an F. It's a straight out F on the surface. I'm just believe there may be more than what we see.
Well, I did a search in a bunch of different sites, and there's absolutely no indications of an active appeal or new filings in the Murthy case. If there's going to be a case where the Supreme Court looks at it, this should have been the one, but there's nothing being filed anywhere. So I have the feeling this may be a dead issue, and that's a tragedy for justice.
Well, my suggestion is, as this current administration does their investigations, that's what I'm banking on, is that there is going to be a enlightenment of evidence that we didn't know about. That's going to, and this is more of a hope than a definite, but that I believe that there may be a nice big tank of evidence that will show a whole lot of wrongdoing, purposeful collusion with private businesses like Facebook. We'll see. But like I said, on the surface, it's an F, because you're right. First Amendment's very sacred, freedom of speech. And as I said earlier, the problem isn't as much the censorship by Facebook as it is the collusion with government.
Very good. Okay, let's move on to our next case. This is a fun one. This has to do with racial gerrymandering, and it's called Louisiana versus Calais. I believe it's pronounced Callais. And this
Calais.
is about, if it's Louisiana, so it probably is French. It's about
gerrymandering and Calais. We'll get it right now. All right, go ahead.
It's we've been going through the Madison's notes where Gary himself was one of the people that's one of the speakers, and I'm very careful to always pronounce his name correctly.
Yeah, Albert Gary, yeah.
Yes. All right, so basically the court announced that they would rehear the case when the court reconvenes in the fall. That's significant because they usually don't do that. And there's some hints from some of the things that Thomas said that there may be some really interesting. We'll go through that here in a second. Very interesting developments in the whole topic of gerrymandering. Let's just start it out. Both the Republicans and Democrats gerrymander to their political advantage. Agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah, this is not a Republican or a Democrat thing. This is just what political parties do to benefit themselves. We do have rules against it, and I'm going to go through that to some degree. By pushing it to next year, they didn't tip their hand on how anyone voted. They did not announce any additional questions for litigants to address, but they probably will before they reconvene. So the issue here is Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act of 1965. It basically says you cannot use racial quotas, what have you, to create voting districts, in a nutshell. Can Section 2 be used to remedy racial gerrymandering by state legislatures? It's going to be an interesting jurisdiction question when I bring that to you, Doug. So after the 2020 census, Louisiana legislature, which is Republican, they issued a visibly gerrymandered map with 5 safe GOP seats and 1 safe Democrat seat sitting in New Orleans. Shall we say, civil rights people got upset because Louisiana is 1/3 black. They think they should have 2 seats. Federal district agrees with the plaintiffs in 2023, ordering new maps with a second majority-minority district. The Fifth Circuit Appeals upholds the ruling, and the state legislature had to redraw a new map in 2024 with a second, what they call majority-minority district. So we had a majority-minority.
They're essentially legalizing gerrymandering, but for racial reasons.
Interesting you would make that argument, because that's one of the things that comes up here in all these arguments is, okay, if the state legislature can't gerrymander, how come the courts can reverse gerrymander?
Right.
That's really the question here.
That's a part of it.
It's one of them, yeah. So the new group of plaintiffs then sues and describes themselves as non-African American voters. They sued the appeals court, and that's what's in front of Supreme Court now. A different federal district court agrees with this new lawsuit from the non-African American voters. Civil rights groups get involved, as always, and they appealed to the Supreme Court to overturn the second court's ruling. Now, here's where the history gets fun. Supreme Court has shown growing hostility to racial gerrymandering cases. There was an 2023 Alabama case that was upheld. Kavanaugh gets interesting here because he's written some concurring opinions suggesting he might be willing to roll back the court's power to remedy racial gerrymandering. Obviously, it's also argued that the court remedies also violate the Voting Rights Act and is also gerrymandering, as you just mentioned. Thoughts?
All right. So one of the issues is that the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional in the first place because what it does, is it singles out certain groups, and B, it really singles out the southern states. If you read the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then there's a couple of others that come up, I think it's like 69 or something like that in 73. And all of them basically say that, in particular, that the southern states are really the ones being targeted here, and that the southern states cannot make any changes whatsoever regarding voting without getting congressional approval. And so now you've got, number one, there's no authority for that. Number two, what you see is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Is that not also what the racial gerrymandering is doing? Is that not then making a law for the benefit of a particular group? Once again, you're violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And so this should have been an easy case just because of those violations. However, you still got to stop gerrymandering. So what do? And that's where the real wrestle match goes on.
Yeah, and it's going to be a wrestling match. I will... Here's an article we have. Oops, did I lose it? See if our producer can get that article back up. But this is from newrepublic.com, and the headline says, "The Supreme Court's Most Worrisome Non-Decision." Subheadline says, "The Roberts Court has asked for re-argument in a key redistricting case, a move that strongly suggests the conservative majority is about to whack the Voting Rights Act again." We can go through the whole article, but it's a regular. This is definitely written from a left-wing tent.
I could tell the title, yeah.
Yeah, but they gives a pretty good history, and it's a little bit histrionic, and they're calling it a visibly gerrymandered map, and it most certainly is if you look at the map.
Well, and the question becomes, why did the Supreme Court punt it? And it comes back to something if you've talked about before. Supreme Court doesn't want to do the hearing of the opinions and the research and all that. They want the lower courts to do that. So they're sending it back to get more research done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see what happens. Did they pick up that case in the fall? So it's only 2-3 months away. I don't know what's going to develop in the meantime. Other cases coming down the pipeline. Yes, there's always gerrymandering cases in the pipeline. So they might be able to pick and choose which one they end up actually hearing. But it's going to, this is going to move 5 to 10 congressional seats. And the question really comes down to, someone's got to make the districts. Who should it be? And how do you ensure that it's fair?
I've always been a fan of grids.
That might be fair. Yeah, well, unfortunately, that someone would find a way to complain about that.
We got break right on us.
Then we'll see you after.
I will expose the corruption in Sacramento and hold these crooks accountable. I'm a businessman, a farmer, and an unapologetic fighter for California, and that's why I'm dangerous to them. We the people must take back control of our lives.
We can turn California red again.
With action, with a movement.
We are just getting started.
And I guess we're back.
Well, that was quick.
Yeah, that was quick.
I hadn't even gotten myself ready for the next episode. But let's just go on. Let's go right where we left off. We're talking about gerrymandering. And, there's not a whole lot really we've talked about what the case is. I really brought this up because it's one we're going to want to keep an eye on next year and to get people to pay attention to this in the news because it will be there. So my grade for this one is an I for incomplete. We don't know yet.
Yeah, I agree. That's and we're not going to, and even if they take the case later and they wind up ruling on, we still don't know because gerrymandering is an ongoing issue. It goes all the way back to the early years of this country. Once again, I'm a firm believer that while you'll never get rid of it completely, grid lines will help alleviate a lot of the problems.
Yeah, and I'm not going to do this today, but we've we talked about an expanded version of the electrical college on other shows, and
Yeah.
that may be a way around that, but I haven't written that up to its full extent, so we'll table that thought for now. You want to move on to the next case?
Let's do it.
All right. This is a case known as McMahon versus New York. McMahon, of course, being Secretary of the Department of Education Linda McMahon, and New York being the named plaintiff that is suing her for.
So Linda McMahon is the Department of Education secretary, and also, and I've always found this funny, wife of Vince McMahon, WWE. But hey, go ahead.
Yeah, well, let me see if I can pull that up because it's a pretty interesting write-up.
While he's looking, just a reminder, you're listening to Re-Federalist Radio with Warhamster Brady and Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, DouglasVGibbs.com. So go ahead.
Yeah, I like to give some of the left-leaning periodicals a little bit of play here so we can actually see what they're saying as well, and that's what I'm going to do right now. And let me pull this up on screen. And this is from Vox. Let me know when you can see that. You should be able to.
I can see it.
Excellent. It says the Supreme Court just handed Trump his biggest victory of his second term, and they didn't even bother to explain themselves. Now, this is written by Ian Millhiser. If you're familiar with Vox, Ian Millhiser, he's written some stuff that has turned out to be 180 degrees dead wrong. I think he was all over the Hunter Biden laptop story, got that wrong. This is definitely a political hack, but we're going to listen to what he has to say because he is a good reporter. Gets most of the facts right and then gives his opinion. He says the Supreme Court ruled on Monday that the Trump administration may fire more than half the Department of Education's workforce. Mass terminations that, in Education Secretary Linda McMahon's words, are the first step on the road to a total shutdown of the entire department. Donald Trump gave an executive order on his first or second day of this term saying he wanted to eliminate the Department of Education and move all those powers to the states. This is something that is very popular with a lot of parents groups around the country. I think it's very easy to argue that the Department of Education has been incredibly ineffective at its job. Its test scores have gone down progressively since it was invented, as well as a number of other measurable problems.
I wouldn't say invented, but definitely reestablished. The Department of Education, a version of what became ultimately the Department of Education arose up right after the war between the states, and it got struck down as unconstitutional. And then when it reduced itself to just giving recommendations and taking, doing reports and studies, the people still freaked out because they didn't want the government involved in education at all. And eventually it was completely eliminated. Of course, then just a decade and a half, 2 decades later, they started up again with this national push, this time with progressive education, with Dewey in 1899, who, by the way, used to be president of the Psychology Association. You know what's going on there. And it's just, we've been going downhill ever since. But this one here, the Department of Education was established in the 70s under Jimmy Carter. And that's when the real downward spiral really took place.
First of all, Dewey also spent 4 or 5 years over in the former Soviet Union before he came back to America. And they both liked each other's ideas quite a bit. He was very popular over there.
Well, Dewey also spent a lot of time in Germany. There was a lot of the Marxist ideas bubbling around in education in Germany also.
Yeah. And first question, of course, is is the Department of Education one of those departments that has no constitutional right to exist?
It has no constitutional authority when it comes to the federal government. Education is not only not mentioned in the Constitution, but the Founding Fathers were very adamant about how, while education was important, public schooling could be important. If there was to be public schools, they'd be funded by the states and then administered by the localities and the parents. That was the original attitude. But it goes beyond that. The other question here isn't just the Department of Education. It is whether or not the president can start eliminating these seats. And that's the big deal. And it's his branch. The Department of Education falls under the executive branch, while the final elimination of the department would need to be done by Congress. Any structuring or elimination of personnel or adding of personnel and all of that That is completely up to the president. It is his branch, executive branch.
That really is the issue here, and we're going to get into this a little further down in the article. That's what the argument's all about. Just let me jump back in. It says the court's decision in McMahon versus New York was handed down on the court's shadow docket, which is a mix of emergency motions and other expedited matters that the justices often decide without full briefing or oral argument. So these are the quick, rapid-fire decisions that need to be done in real time. It's called the shadow docket.
Mm-hmm.
As is often the case in shadow docket decisions, none of the Republican justices explained their decision. Justice Sotomayor wrote a dissent, which was joined by both of her fellow Democratic justices. We're not supposed to have political parties in your justices. I hate when they describe it that way, although it's true.
All the justices are supposed to be apolitical, but we know they're not.
And they haven't been since John Marshall.
Exactly. Well, you can even go all the way back to John Jay if you want. But anyway, go ahead.
Technically, this is back to the 1800 people, so it's been a problem for a long time.
Yeah.
Technically, the court's decision in McMahon is temporary. It permits the Trump administration to fire most education department's workers while this lawsuit is still pending in federal court. But it's far from clear how the education department can unwind a decision to fire more than half of its 4,000 employees. And here's the real question here. It's called impoundment. The McMahon decision is particularly unnerving because it suggests that President Donald Trump is allowed to impound federal spending, unilaterally refusing to spend money or to continue federal programs that are mandated by an act of Congress. He would go on to say that impoundment is absolutely non-constitutional and unprecedented, even because impoundment is unconstitutional. Even some of the court's Republicans have previously said as much. So, Doug, let's talk about the history of impoundment real quick before we give a vote on this.
Well, yeah, impoundment is basically, it's basically, is the president of the United States required to spend every penny appropriated by Congress to a particular item provided by law? That's ultimately what the question is. Now, we can look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Appropriations, it's going to go to education, it's going to go to defense, that kind of thing. But the real-world application is up to the executive. He's the one that executes the spending, executes the law, and Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. Article 2, Section 1, the president will faithfully execute the office of the president of the United States. That's from the oath. Article 2, Section 3, he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And Article 5 provides for the process to amend the Constitution. So now we have to ask ourselves, okay, so is it constitutional? The idea of the power of impoundment has been considered constitutional since day one. Thomas Jefferson used it twice.
Yeah, first one was he refused to spend $50,000 in appropriated money that was appropriated for gunboats, arguing that the need no longer exists. I don't want to spend the money.
Louisiana Purchase gave us both sides of the Mississippi River, so no longer needed. He also refused to spend a lot of the things that Adams had been spending on, and he didn't agree with the Adams spending, and those bills, those laws wound up getting reversed after he refused to spend the money. And so the idea of impoundment has been in place, since beginning. They took it away during the 70s under Nixon because while Nixon, after Watergate, but before he was threatened to be impeached, and before he was already being threatened to be, but before he resigned, he was refusing to spend monies on welfare programs and that Johnson had been spending, and so they passed a law saying he couldn't do it anymore. So here's the question. Can a constitutional power be eliminated by a piece of legislation?
I don't believe it can. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974 tried to basically say, no, this constitutional power no longer exists. I like the analogy that, you're a kid, your parents give you an allowance, you decide where to spend it. That's a decent analogy.
The example I like to use is mom gives you, $10 to get a dozen eggs. And so the kid goes out and he finds eggs for, $4 a dozen. He comes back, gives mom the change. The mom's not going to be like, no, I told you spend $10, take those eggs back, go find someone who sells eggs for $10. That's idiotic. The kid was in the real world situation. The president is in the real world situation, knows how it needs to be spent.
Yeah, that's a better analogy than mine. Interestingly enough, the Impoundment Act of 1974, and it's been challenged since then, but one of the interesting side notes that happened there is what created the Congressional Budget Office, which was supposed to be nonpartisan and basically decide these issues to some degree. How much are we actually spending? CBO, I think, has deteriorated over the decades. At once upon a time had a good purpose, and somehow, like everything else in D.C., has become politicized. Some of the
I would like to see the Impoundment Control Act invalidated, just like Roe v. Wade was invalidated by this court. And I believe it would be, at least with a 5-4, maybe with a 6-3, because, we have a president who is intent on unraveling tyranny. And he's willing to do it in ways that few people even realize exist. And the only reason why this has come up is because he came up with the idea, because Trump has tried to use the power of impoundment on other things. This is an issue. This is not the first time this issue has come up. But ultimately, I think we're going to see some changes when it comes to power of impoundment. I think it's going to go back to executive power, because the executive, it is his job on how to handle the executive branch, how to execute the law, how to execute the spending, separation of powers. They said that the Congress appropriates where, defense, education, whatever, but the how is up to the president.
Couple of quotes from justices. Brett Kavanaugh, back when he was a lower court judge, wrote, "Even the president does not have the unilateral authority to refuse to spend funds. Instead, the president must propose the rescission of funds, and Congress then may decide whether to approve a rescission bill, Congress being so functional and all." That was Kavanaugh 12 years ago. I think we have a different Brett Kavanaugh today.
I think so, too.
That's what it sounds like.
Well, and the part of the problem is we're in a situation where people have come into and partly because of Trump. Well, the president can't do anything without permission from the Congress and without permission from the court. Well, then why do you have a president?
Oh, didn't they debate that in Madison's notes at the Philadelphia Convention?
Mm-hmm.
Another quote here. Future Chief Justice William Rehnquist wrote in 1969, "It is in our view extremely difficult to formulate a constitutional theory to justify a refusal by the president to comply with congressional directive to spend. I believe my friend Douglas V. Gibbs just formulated that constitutional theory," Mr. Rehnquist. So that's an article from a left-leaning version of this thing, but it is a big deal. If McMahon's able to downsize the Department of Education to the point where it is useless, what other departments can we do that in? A lot of the Doge cuts are going to come into play.
Well, we saw it with USAID. We're seeing it anyway. Gone now. I think EPA may be next. We'll see.
How do you want to grade this decision?
So ultimately, they decided that they weren't going to take it just yet. Was it?
Yeah, the ultimate decision was. Bear with me. Let me pull it back up here. The ultimate decision was it was almost a punt, but they basically are sending it back to lower courts to provide through. In the meantime, the injunction is lifted, and
I give them a B. I give them a B, and we got to go to break. So, what's your grade, real quick?
We're a B- on that.
Okay, let's go to break.
My name is Leo Zaki, and I was born and raised in California. My family's been in California for over 100 years. In 1928, my great-grandfather started Zaki Farms here in Los Angeles, and it became the largest poultry company on the West Coast. We also became the largest privately owned employer in the state of California. Zaki Farms was my life. I started at the bottom, and I worked my way all the way up to becoming vice president. I know what hard work is. I put in the time. I've done it. In California, from growing up to California today, 2 different places. What happened to California? Things keep getting worse. I'm running for governor because California is my home. I'm coming in with common sense solutions to clean up California. Political corruption is what's holding California back. The politicians have created these problems. When I'm elected governor, on day one, the first 5 things I'm going after are drought, homelessness, crime, education, and political corruption. I'm Leo Zaki, and I'm running for governor in California.
This isn't just the story of a natural disaster. It's the story of what happens when leadership fails. Behind me is what's left of a family's home. A place where children played, memories were made, but it's all gone now. And part of the blame lies with decisions made far from here. Sacramento would call this a natural disaster. But there was nothing natural about empty reservoirs during fire season. And it's not empty because the firefighters used it up. It's empty because it was drained. Nothing natural about failed hydrants as homes burned. Nothing natural about families losing everything because politicians chose politics over protection. I'm here on Palisades Drive in front of the Palisades Hills community. This is a clear failure at the highest levels. Gavin Newsom, I'm calling for your resignation, and I'm going to take your job. I'm Leo Zaki, and I'm running for governor here in California.
And we are back for our final segment on Zaki Radio. This is Re-Federalist Radio. I am Brady, known as the War Hamster. Joining me is Mr. Constitution, Doug Gibbs.
Great to be here. And real quick, I want to make a comment about the commercials. I love that. Calling for your resignation, and I'm going to take your job. Go, Mr. Zaki. I love it.
Yeah, Leo's gonna kill it. He's a good guy, and I've known him since his first run for governor, and he's one of the very first candidates that I had on my show.
Oh, no kidding.
We've been friends for a while. When we left for the break, we were talking about the McMahon versus New York, and we both gave it lower grades. And like I told you going into the show, we're going to get lower grades today. This last case we're going to do might be an exception. And this is a case called Florida. It's a case about Florida's law called SB4-C. This is about state immigration authority. So I am going to pull up the article with that.
Shades of Arizona is suddenly bumping into my mind.
How did I know? How did I know you were going to say that? Here we go. This is from SCOTUS blog, great source of information, and it says, on the emergency docket, the Supreme Court denies Florida's request to enforce state law on illegal immigration. Supreme Court on Wednesday refused to allow Florida to enforce a state law that makes it a crime for anyone who entered the United States illegally to enter or remain in the state. In a brief unsigned order, and you've got to see this, I'll just pull it up real quick. One sentence. The application for stay presented to Justice Thomas and by him referred to the court is denied. So what was denied? The justices left in place an order by a federal district judge in Miami that bars the state from implementing their own law. The groups challenging the law had argued that the state had failed to adequately explain why, especially given Florida's extensive and ongoing collaboration with federal enforcement efforts, the state must also be allowed to enforce its own state immigration system outside of federal supervision and control while this expedited litigation proceeds. So what they're doing is they're putting a stay on the Florida law. As of right now, a Miami judge has said you cannot enforce your law while it's being litigated in federal courts. A state law being litigated in federal courts. Have we talked about that before, Doug?
Well, yeah, but here's the thing: this state law could go into the federal courts because it's regarding a federal authority of immigration. So I'm going to say that it can't go in the courts. Secondly, one thing I'm going to say is there's the general idea here, and then there's the specific idea here. The general idea is, can a state enforce immigration law, or do they have any power regarding immigration law or immigration as an issue in general? And immigration is a concurrent issue in the sense that while it is a federal authority, the states can operate regarding immigration. The example I like to use is a schoolyard where the principal's office is given the task of keeping the campus safe, but that does not mean that the teachers cannot lock their door necessarily to keep someone that might get on campus out of their room, or apprehend a child that shouldn't be on campus in their class and then hold them for the principal's office to pick them up. So there are certain allowances. Now, the specific issue here, though, is can a state keep someone from entering their state when they shouldn't be in the country? And that I don't think they can. While I do want them to be able to lock their door and have enforcement to arrest these people, to try to catch them at the border, and you're not allowed. There's kind of that's. We have in Article 4 we have full faith and credit, and the states are supposed to. We're not supposed to have borders between the states and all that. There's supposed to be free movement, and you don't stop someone until you realize they're the lawbreaker or whatever. I don't like what they're trying to do there.
You look at this from a supremacy clause standpoint. And the supremacy clause only exists where the federal law is supreme in cases where they overlap.
Right, and a state can't act contrary to the federal law if it's constitutionally allowed.
In this particular case, the Florida law is actually almost verbatim using the exact immigration law, U.S. immigration law that's on the books. And all they're saying is we're going to enforce it in our state as well. People that are here illegally are already breaking the law, and we want to be able to enforce that, is what they're saying.
Being able to detain them, yes. Being able to deport them, no.
Very good. We'll continue this article a little bit further. The Florida law at the center of the case is SB 4. Skip that. An immigrants' rights group, the Florida Immigration Coalition, and an advocacy group, the Farm Workers Association of Florida, went to federal court to challenge the new law, along with 2 undocumented immigrants who could be arrested and prosecuted under the law. They argued that federal immigration laws superseded the Florida law. And as I just explained, the federal law is following the federal immigration.
It echoes the federal law, right?
Exactly. And that Florida law violates the Dormant Commerce Clause, which is a... Doug,
real quick, Commerce Clause was not designed to allow the federal government to have authority over anything that crosses state lines. The way it was written and why it was explained in the beginning, the Commerce Clause is there in case when something crosses state lines and there's a dispute, then the federal government can act as mediator. But if there is no dispute, then crossing state lines is none of the federal government's business. It's none of the federal government's business until there's a dispute that crosses state lines.
And the Commerce Clause has been twisted and distorted over 200 plus years. And so that gives rise to a sentence like this.
Yeah.
The theory that the provision of the Constitution giving Congress power to regulate commerce between the states, here it comes, also bars states from discriminating against or placing a burden on that commerce. Where does it say that in the Constitution?
Well, and here's the question, though, when it comes to that. See, the Commerce Clause, it has nothing to do with this. This is not commerce. This is people, first of all.
Yeah, it's a bad argument.
Yeah. So the question is, can you shut your doors to people? At the state line, no. Once they're in your state and you find out they have broken the law and you need to detain them, yes.
So really, you're drawing a difference between a state line and an international border. And the international border is clearly the federal government's purview.
Mm-hmm.
All right, going on. U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit turned down the state's request to freeze Williams' order. Court of Appeals concluded it was likely, given the federal government's longstanding and distinct interest in the exclusion and admission of aliens and the Immigration and Nationality Act's extensive regulation on alien admission, that the Florida law is trumped by federal laws relating to an alien entry into and presence in the United States.
This sounds like the Obama argument with Arizona. Hey, since we're not enforcing it and we're letting them in, you can't do something contrary. That's not what the law says.
Why don't you talk a little more about that Arizona case? I find that interesting because, what is it? Arizona had no standing to sue because they went the wrong direction.
Well, yeah, they basically used the supremacy clause against Arizona, saying, well, because we're not enforcing immigration law, you're not allowed to. The Arizona immigration law mirrored, as does this one, federal law, with one exception. In Arizona, they could not profile. So it was actually, from a leftist point of view, a nicer law. But here was the real key. When Holder, the Chief Justice of Obama's administration, sued Arizona, he didn't sue a person. He did not sue the governor. He did not sue a particular group. He sued the state as a whole for their law. And he filed that lawsuit with a local district court, and then they picked apart the law and they basically line item vetoed certain areas of the law through that lower court. Article 3 says that if a state is a party in a case, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So even where it went was unconstitutional, much less how they were deciding, what they were deciding regarding that case. Arizona has just like the teacher with her classroom, has every right to detain persons that are not supposed to be inside their classroom or their state, depending on which example you're using.
Excellent, Doug. Thank you. I'd like to just read the quote that came from the Solicitor General of Florida, a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey D'Souza. He told the justice that states like Florida can enact laws aimed to stem the tide of illegal immigration into their borders, and that the Supreme Court had never endorsed a view that federal immigration law fully displaces the states from regulating in the field of alien movement. That's a direct quote.
That's a great quote.
SB 4C does not conflict with federal immigration law, D'Souza insisted. To the contrary, he contended, it scrupulously tracks federal law and does not violate the Dormant Commerce Clause since it is unrelated to economic protectionism.
Hey, I just said that. I like this guy. Mind you, folks, I have not read this article. I didn't see this coming, so it's pretty cool that I'm in agreement there. Go ahead.
Oh, that's a good job. So, anyways, this is going to go through the courts a little bit more, but it's a very important case from a number of different directions. There's a state immigration authority, obviously, which Doug addressed. Talks a little bit about what if a state passes a law that agrees with the federal court? Is there any kind of conflict there? I don't know. This could be interesting. It'd be worth watching. Any thoughts?
So ultimately, what was the ruling?
They basically upheld the stay that basically Florida
they said
cannot.
They said that the state could not until there's more. That's right. I remember now. And you know what? It should have been ruled. Leave Florida alone. Let them do their thing as long as they're not doing it at the state line. It's a funny little thing. You got to wait until there's actually the encroachment. And so if they've got officers at the state line, what do you can't do that. But once they're inside their state, it's their business. It belongs to the state. It's an issue that belongs to the state. Yes, federal officers can operate in the state and handle immigration. Yes, the immigration law in place and deportation belongs to the federal government. But it doesn't mean that the state has to sit there with their hands tied and not do anything inside their state.
Well, state has every right to say, we don't want criminals in our state. And it's not just you're a criminal and you've been accused, what have you. But when you're in this country illegally, you broke the law coming here, but you continue to break the law and are engaged in criminal activity every single day you remain in the country illegally. And Florida's got the right, basically, I think, to prosecute criminals. And if you're saying they can't because the federal jurisdiction, I don't know, we've got a bit of an issue. We're about done for the day, Doug. You want to tell everybody? Okay, real quick, give it a letter grade and tell everyone where they can find you.
C-. We'll see what happens with it.
I'm a little better on this one. I think it's a B-, and just because I got a chance to read some of the preliminary arguments and a couple of questions, and it's got a chance. Doug, where can they find you?
DouglasVGibbs.com, and I'm on the air 6 times a week, 5 days out of the week, and I'm getting ready to add Friday. DouglasVGibbs.com, you can learn all about it.
Yep, and this is Re-Federalist Radio. We'll be on every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific. This will be probably done with Supreme Court scoreboard for now, but we'll have some other fun and exciting constitutional topics for you next week. All right, everybody, until next time, cheers.
The nonprofit Reno Sparks Assistance League Thrift Shop offers quality